Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it is brought to you locally by Caesars Entertainment Group of Atlantic City. Come experience the ultimate sports destinations all season long. Wild Wild West, Tropicana, Harrah's Resort, Atlantic City. Book your game day experience today at Caesars.com. Geoff Mosher is one of the hosts of the Inside the Birds podcast. He and Adam Kaplan drop a new one, and you can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, Geoff Mosher is here for today's edition of Football at 4, where there's a lot of Eagles stuff swirling around this team. And let's start with Geoff coming in here on a Football at 4 Wednesday. What's going on, Moshe?
Oh, nothing, Mike. Just sitting around waiting to see if I'm going to be the next governor of New Jersey.
Has that been not determined yet?
Well, it has not been determined. That I'm not, or that anybody is? Well, both, yes.
Well, it's funny because one of the guys in there, okay, so there's obviously Murphy and Citarelli is the other guy.
Citarelli, yeah.
So there's a third guy whose name was Hoffman, I guess. I don't know what his first name was. But he got some votes. And one of my college roommates' name is Hoffman. So my other roommates are blaming him for taking votes from somebody who they want to win. I don't need to tell you who they want to win because it's so close it could have gone either way.
It's a dirty, corrupt system, Mike, I tell you. Writing in a guy named Hoffman, can't have that.
All right, so a couple things to get to. One, Eric Wilson was waived today. Now, he was inactive last week. He was a healthy scratch. If we were just talking hockey in the last hour, he would have been a healthy scratch, if you will. Today, they pulled the plug on the Eric Wilson experiment, and that there was a lot there. So, one, they decided to pull the plug on him. Obviously, they weren't using him. Who benefits now? What do we see with Wilson out? What is the linebacking situation going to start moving forward looking like?
Yeah, so they're operating mostly out of a nickel defense because most offenses operate out of a 3 wide receiver offense. So when they're in nickel, I imagine you're going to see a lot of what you saw last week against the Lions, which is you're going to see TJ Edwards and you're going to see Davion Taylor as your nickel linebackers. Now, there may be some scenarios where they mix in Alex Singleton if there's a different kind of look there, perhaps, that they want a little more coverage, so to speak. But I do think TJ Edwards is the guy. And, of course, he had 13 tackles. He had 2 tackles for a loss. He blew up a couple of screens. He's the guy that stands to benefit most from the absence and the waiving of Eric Wilson. Long overdue, by the way. Davion
Taylor is the guy that most people just didn't think was ready. I mean, they thought that this guy wouldn't be ready to be a linebacker, a starting, get snaps. Is this staff just putting him out there trial by fire? Has he just escalated quickly? What are we seeing from Taylor that this team is seeing to get him the snaps that they felt comfortable releasing Wilson, who I get it wasn't playing all that well, but he was a veteran who they brought in here because essentially we thought he knew John Gannon's system, although your tweet earlier today was interesting on that note.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, I personally think, and it's not just me, I've talked to some people about this too. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Alex Singleton is the more experienced and the better, more well-rounded linebacker. Now, when we talk about Eagles linebackers, you're throwing them all into a group of, they're not starters for most teams anyway. But Davion Taylor is a guy who is clearly has tremendous athletic upside, and they want to see he's a 3rd-round pick in his 2nd year, and they want him to learn the game, learn the defense, and eventually see if things slow down in his head, if that athleticism just naturally comes through and picks up. And he didn't really hurt them at all. I thought he played okay against the Lions. He did hurt them the last 2 games before that against the Bucs and, of course, against the Raiders, just by not knowing where he's supposed to be, having his side of the field targeted a whole lot. And I imagine that will probably continue against the Chargers. So even though Alex Singleton was probably a better answer there, they are in an evaluation mode, even though they don't say that. And they're trying to get the most out of Davion Taylor that they can right now.
So you're looking at Edwards and Taylor as getting the most snap now, and Avery, I guess, would be in that mix somewhat as well.
Only when they want to have three linebackers on the field and play that kind of 5-2 alignment that you see where Avery's up on the line of scrimmage, and that's predominantly when the offense comes out with either a fullback or two tight ends or some kind of run look about it.
Yeah, now, and I was bringing this up earlier, is now because you have a guy like Davion Taylor and Avery who are, better athletes, more susceptible to pass rushing, do you anticipate that makes John Gannon a little bit more aggressive with those two guys? Hey, I got two guys that I like that can get to the quarterback a little bit more than Eric Wilson can. Let me turn up the fire a little bit.
Well, the thing about Eric Wilson was that he had that experience, as you mentioned, in the defense playing for Minnesota. So he was actually a decent blitzer, and he was decent in coverage prior to coming to the Eagles. It was really against the run that he wasn't as sound as the other two areas. But, I just been watching him over the first 3 to 5 weeks of the season that he wasn't very good at anything. And then they weren't blitzing, but he was not stopping the run well. And I didn't think his coverage was all that good. And I think that's why they've just decided to move on here. So I don't know that they're going to blitz a whole lot more, say, against the Chargers, that if at all. I wouldn't be surprised if he went back to kind of the softer zones. I hope not. I hope Jonathan Gannon likes to challenge the offense a little bit more. And maybe you're right. Maybe that he feels more comfortable in some of the rotations that he will. But I don't know that they see Taylor yet as someone that they're comfortable bringing, 5 or 6 times a game. In fact, last game when they wanted a blitz, they usually did it out of a dime formation, and Alex Singleton was their dime linebacker, and they used him to blitz. Yeah. So again, I think that's where it comes in, that Alex is more of a well-rounded linebacker who can do a lot of things in this defense, and I don't think he's going to get completely lost in it.
Yeah, you're not lying when you said Wilson. He allowed 85.7% of his targets to be caught in 7 games, and he was kind of
that's all.
Yeah, right. He was brought in with the thought of, we knew he wasn't a good run stuffer, but he was going to be better in pass coverage. That was not the case. Eric Wilson was released today. So Davion Taylor looks like the 3rd-round pick is going to get some more snaps in the Eagles' defense, along with T.J. Edwards. So essentially, Alex Singleton has been benched.
I would say just different kind of role. He's a dime linebacker now, and so the Chargers throw the ball around a lot. They've got a lot of wide receivers. So if they come out there and 3 wide receivers and a flex tight end, Alex Singleton's going to be on the field. And let's just say their Chargers are doing a nice job kind of, maybe like they're kind of 3 wide receiver, 1 tight end look where they run a little bit and then they start using play action the way the Raiders did, and they really start peppering the side of the field that Taylor plays on. Maybe you'll see a switch mid-game to go to Singleton because of his experience and his knowledge of the defense. But I think they're going to give Taylor the first shot. And Singleton will be more of a specialist linebacker and play special teams.
All right. Yesterday they made a late trade right at the deadline. They brought in Kerry Vincent Jr. Now, DeCecco was on right when it happened. I expected him to know a lot more about Kerry Vincent Jr. than you would. That being said, Sirianni did discuss him today and why they targeted him. He added corners almost to the way they value the offense and defensive line, which is I find interesting because they stink at drafting corners. But his really answer was, we want to stockpile depth and talent at that position because we value it much like we do the lines.
Yeah, and I would say the term that you hear a lot in league circles or personnel circles is dart throwing, right? If you have a position that you're not exactly deep at or talented at, and as you mentioned, a position that you haven't drafted really well at, what you do is try to stockpile as many kind of high upside traits guys as possible. And if you do 5 or 6, and the Eagles have about 5 or 6 of these guys now, if you add in Mac McCain and there's like 2 or 3 other guys on the roster that are
Tay
just like
Gowan, who they just
Tay Gowan, right? Exactly. For. Josiah Scott, right? If you get 1 or 2 of these guys to work out, then good for you. That then you hit on something. And the Eagles took this approach similarly to wide receiver, right? They drafted Jalen Reagor 2 years ago in the 1st round, but then they took John Hightower in the 6th, and they took Quez Watkins, and then they wound up
they traded for Goodwin.
Right. They traded for Goodwin. They brought in Fulgham in training camp. So that's what they were doing. They were dart throwing. And lo and behold, they got 4 good games out of Travis Fulgham, which went for naught because the season really buckled in front of them. But John Hightower's a guy they've protected every single week on the practice squad. And I imagine they do that because they still see some potential in there and they want to continue to coach him up.
That's interesting because last year Hightower seemingly was ahead of Watkins. Now Watkins is starting and Hightower is inactive.
Yeah, well, that's the problem when you're dart throwing and you don't have something that like a Devontae Smith where you know what you're getting and it's not a week-to-week battle with the coaching staff to kind of see what you got and get through it.
So I guess that has led us down this road because the Eagles are one of the few teams in the league that could add an Odell Beckham Jr. should he be waived. Deshaun Jackson was already waived. Many people have suggested this team is lacking a veteran wide receiver. If those guys are free, should the Eagles be interested? Geoff Mosher.
I would say no. And, the Eagles, I don't know that this is the guy that you want in your clubhouse or your locker room when you've already got a lot of young receivers, some of them who do have had maturity issues in the past. So Adam and I have talked a lot about they should have gotten a veteran wide receiver who's a good teacher, a good instructor. And we've also said, last year you had Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson, and those are, again, not necessarily the type of guys that are take you under the wing types and that you want spreading all of, to the locker room. So I don't think so. I wouldn't do it. And I really wonder. I mean, Odell's been hurt a whole lot, going back the last 3 years. He just doesn't have the numbers even when he's playing. He doesn't even have a 100-yard game this year. So is it the quarterback? Is it him? If it's the quarterback, is coming here going to be any better? Because it's not like, Jalen Hurts is setting the world on fire either. And if he's going to be upset like he is in Cleveland, what makes you think he's going to be any happier here in Philadelphia? It's not like Cleveland's blessed with a lot of wide receiver talent either.
I tweeted out, I've been asked a bunch, what do you think? I said, no. Look, to me, Odell Beckham is just not the same player. He's just a shell of himself. I mean, you said the injuries. Kevin Stefanski said in his press conference, hey, I need to do a better job of getting him the ball. That's game planning. That's code word for we don't think he's very good to put him in the game plan, right?
Yeah.
You have a player of Odell Beckham's caliber 4 years ago in New York. The game plan starts, ends, and everything in the middle with him. That tells me that Stefanski just doesn't think he's any good anymore.
And that's what I'm saying. Without having seen a whole lot of Browns football, I just noticed that every time I do, I don't see Odell Beckham either playing or when he is playing, he doesn't seem to be featured in the offense, or he is and then he gets hurt. So I just, he's got a lot of money on his contract, and the Eagles are trying to kind of survive here with some veterans on their team that may give them a large cap hit if they have to move on this offseason. So I just don't think it's fundamentally a good fit for this team. And he may be better than what the numbers suggest this year in the last 2 years, but I just don't think it's the right match.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That I don't think he is essentially a bottom tier guy. He is not even a part of conversation. I hate to bring fantasy football in, but he's unplayable on a fantasy football team at this point. How close were they in trading Fletcher Cox?
That's, without being on the other end of the phone call, I don't know. Obviously, if there was a great offer out there, Fletcher Cox would have probably been traded.
Because I know his contract situation, if they traded him, they had a lot of dead money in contractual situations there. So,
right. And if you're going to take a massive cap hit, you're not just going to trade a guy for a 5th round pick or a 4th round pick just to say we got rid of him. You're going to look for something great in value, knowing that you have to take this enormous cap hit. So, and Fletcher Cox, I imagine they still think is a good player who's just going through a difficult transition, and maybe next year things are a little different. Maybe they finish stronger this year, and he plays a little bit better and comes to a better. Maybe they agree on better usage for him. There's a whole lot of maybe they just decide to move on from him in the offseason when teams have a little bit more money to deal with and a little bit more understanding of what their assets are. Teams collect assets. They may be willing to trade, in the offseason. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say Fletcher Cox is definitely going to be back next year, because I felt going into this year there was an opportunity or a chance that he might get traded.
Is Lane Johnson in a similar situation? Like, I mean, if they if they got calls for him, would they have listened, in your opinion?
I think that's the thing with Howie. I think there's very few players on the team, especially veterans, right, when you're in transition, that he doesn't listen on. I'm sure there are very few untouchables on this team, right? Give me a player that you think is so good, maybe other than Devontae Smith, because you just drafted him with a top 10 pick. Mm-hmm. But give me a player on this team that's so good that he should be labeled untouchable.
They don't have one. Right. No, they don't have. And let me, right. I mean, outside of saying, look, we like Mailata and Dickerson, and we want that to be the left side of our offensive line for the next 10 years.
Right. That's pretty, Mailata, you just gave a nice contract to. Dickerson, same thing. You don't have a whole lot of defensive ends, so it would probably take a lot to get Josh Sweat, as long as they use him.
Oh, Miles Sanders. Was there any interest in Sanders, you think?
Not that I heard of. So, but I did hear about at least 3 to 5 teams that had conversations with the Eagles about Fletcher Cox. Now, what you'd never know is, and people like to report stuff, but you never really know is, did the Eagles initiate those conversations? Or did teams specifically call looking for Fletcher? Were they talking about somebody else and Fletcher's name came up? That's why I don't really like to name teams or name conversations, despite what I know, because you just never know who was the aggressor.
Well, and then I guess you could have, said, hey, was Steve Nelson a guy? Darius Slay? I mean, these are veteran players. Nelson's on a 1-year deal. Those guys, you wonder if the Eagles were listening to them as well, because the narrative, obviously,
listening or shopping,
because the narrative is, look, you're 3-5, where are you going?
Right.
But are they? I mean, is Jeff Lurie saying we're 3-5 and we're 1 game out, and I want to try to make the playoffs?
I think Jeffrey Lurie, and look, what was the reason Jeffrey Lurie said that he fired Doug Peterson? Remember, he said Doug Peterson did not deserve to get fired, but that they did not share the same vision.
They were on the same page
of the future of the franchise. So to me, Jeffrey Lurie is as much looking down the road at what he wants to be as he is what he is right now. So in the context of your question, I don't think he would have been at all shy about moving any of the players that we mentioned and talked about for really good value in return. I don't think that he would have placed the potential of that last wild card spot over a trade. And let's be fair, anybody that they would have traded is probably not going to make that much difference in the long term for this year. Like, if they trade Fletcher Cox has no sacks right now. So are we saying they couldn't make the playoffs if they traded Fletcher Cox? They're probably not going to make the playoffs anyway. And if they do, it's not going to be because they held on to Fletcher Cox.
It's okay. So yesterday we do who's in, who's out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everything's pretty, cut and dry until you get to that 7th spot in the NFC.
Right.
So you have Carolina at 4-4. They are the current 7th seed in the National Football Conference. The Eagles have beaten them this season. They have, according to whatever rankings, I don't know where they get these from, but they have Carolina has the most difficult schedule in football remaining. They are number 32. Philadelphia has the easiest schedule in football remaining. So you got Carolina, Minnesota, San Francisco, Atlanta, then Philadelphia.
Right.
So which of the teams is Geoff Mosher saying is the standout? Because every time it's like, look, I'm not Mike Gill saying I think the Eagles are a playoff team. But at 3-5 and the other teams, it's like you're asking me, they're all horrible. All of these teams, all these options are horrible. So with the Eagles' schedule, I mean, Josh and I went through it. Like, these teams that are in front of them, they're not winning more than 3 or 4 games. They're not.
You're probably right.
We looked through the schedules yesterday for each team. And, I mean, we were being kind by saying, I can give you 4, but saying 4 means that you're upsetting 2 teams along the way. Philadelphia has 5 winnable games.
Right. So the question is, do they win the winnable games?
Correct.
I had a sort of an argument with a friend the other day. He said, look, if the Eagles beat the Chargers, and he says, I don't think they will, but if they do, Then you look at the next 5 teams, Broncos, Saints, Giants, Jets, and Washington, and you say, well, they could win all those 5 games. And I said, yeah, sure, they could, but you don't always beat the team just because you are theoretically better than them. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers just lost this past weekend to who? I forget they lost. A team that's not better yet, to New Orleans, right? So this team, this Eagles team, has not yet shown that it is to be trusted to just reel off 6 straight wins because the 100%. Other team is weaker.
100%. Yeah. I will say this. If Nick Sirianni is committed to what he did, not 48 times, but, hey, 25 times, this Charger team they don't stop the run a lick. They're the worst run defense in football.
Yeah, it's weird. So it's a little bit skewed. They are the worst run defense in football. They give up a lot of yards on the ground, but they're one of the best pass defenses in football. So you wonder how much of that is because teams cannot throw the ball on them very well, so they try to run the ball on them. I mean, the bottom line is that they started off 4-1. They've lost 2 games recently to New England and to I forget who they had lost 2 weeks ago, but it wasn't pretty for them. I still think that they're the type of team that if you're going to beat, you do have to outscore them. And if you want to outscore them, I agree.
Blasted by the Ravens, 34-6.
That's right. So you've got to. And by the way, the Ravens obviously got a lot of ground yards from Lamar Jackson, which not everybody has a Lamar Jackson. So that kind of contributes to the rushing yards against category that can skew it. Just like the Eagles are a top 5 rushing team right now. Okay, for 7 weeks they did not run the ball, but somehow they're a top 5 rushing team. Why? Because Jalen Hurts runs a lot and adds to that rushing total. So it's a little bit misleading. So the point is, I just still think you have to score a lot of points to beat the Chargers. And to do that, as you were mentioning, you can't throw the ball 40 times a game and you can't run the ball 40 to 45 times a game. You have to be able to mix it up. You have to be able to have a functional offense that does both well and then score enough points to beat the Chargers. Unless you just have a great defensive day, and maybe they will. We'll see.
This would be one that worries me. As we know, when the Eagles have played teams with good quarterbacks, they have really struggled. You know, when the games they've won, they've given up 10 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
That's a winnable. Those are games you can win. Giving up 10 points a game in their wins. The games they've lost, they've given up 35 points per game. Herbert has the ability to be on the 35 side, I think. So this one's interesting.
I would think.
A team that doesn't stop the run, but they have a good quarterback. This is the best quarterback other than Prescott in the last week of the year that they will face by far the rest of the way.
Mike White's not in that category now if he winds up starting for the Jets?
No Mike White. Nope, no Mike White. You got Bridgewater, Simeon, I guess. I don't know who's starting for the Saints in that game. but
Probably maybe Taysom Hill. Yeah.
There you go. All right,
no, it's not a pretty list of quarterbacks, so there'll be some opportunities here.
All right, so you know what's going to do. Every team in the 7th spot right now, one's worse than the other, and it's going to be like the NFC East. You're going to lose, but you're all going to lose. You're just going to be stuck right in this little muck for the rest of this season.
Yeah. Yeah, no, if I were to pick a team at the end here, though, that I think is going to play better than its current record, I still think it'll be Washington. I think their defense the last 2 weeks has started to play a little bit better. It's their offense now that's coming into, and they've got Gibson beat up, but their defense.
Washington's schedule's brutal.
Oh, is it?
They've got Carolina's got the 32nd. Washington's 30th. They've got Tampa Bay, Carolina, Seattle, Oakland, Vegas, Dallas, Philly. Giant. I mean, they got a bunch of games.
I don't know. They're other than Tampa. I mean, Carolina's beatable. Seattle is beatable.
Dallas twice.
Well, yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying Carolina and Seattle to me don't seem like teams that they
Seattle's
can't
going to get
beat
Wilson
the Raiders,
back.
man.
Seattle's going to get Wilson back.
They are, but they were kind of struggling even with Russ. I mean, they were an elite team.
What do you think about that whole Russ thing Mortensen keeps throwing out there?
I'm just kind of surprised by the reaction in this area to that report or whatever discussion you want to. I mean, we've been talking.
He brought it up on
Eagles
NFL
assassination for a long time.
Yeah, he brought it up on NFL's countdown on Sunday, like 2 weeks ago. He casually said it, and then they must have had a podcast that they elaborated on it a lot more. And Schefter essentially confirmed, yes, they're going to be a player for him.
Sure. I mean, nobody should be surprised. I mean, we've been talking about Russell Wilson as the white whale for this organization for quite a while now. I mean, since when they drafted Jalen Hurts, he's the one that got away, the one that they were enamored with and wanted to draft in 2012 and had to settle for some schlub named Nick Foles, who never did anything for this franchise. So it's not surprising to me at all. We know that they're, at this point, unless there's a dramatic improvement from Jalen Hurts, they're probably not going to be welcoming Jalen Hurts back next year as their starting quarterback. And this year's draft quarterbacks, who knows how they think about them? It doesn't seem like it's a real, headliner type of class. And we know that Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers will probably be changing uniforms. So, I mean, to me, it's not that surprising that was brought up and said.
Geoff Mosher, the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brand new. Check it out at Inside Birds, at Geoff Mosher NFL. Give him a follow. And, of course, Football at 4. Andrew's back tomorrow. Adam's here on Friday's show. All right, Jeff. See you, man.
All right. Take care.
There's Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast here on the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN.